Welcome to Things You Don't Know. In this podcast, we're going to take a brief overview of the topic of people with disabilities. Got to say that I take some exception to the term disabled and prefer to use the term people with varying exceptionalities. It just feels to me like calling someone disabled is saying they are not able and is a negative appellation, whereas varying exceptionalities allows for the concept that many people with exceptionalities have positive aspects to their exceptionalities. And we need to really remember that, we being the general population.
We certainly do. I see the concern for a term that seems to exclusively focus on difficulties. Within the community, I have seen a reclaiming of the term crip. It's a term of endearment among mobility folk. It's originally was seen only as an insult.
That's sort of like the term queer in the LGBTQIA community.
That's a good example. There's also a big debate on what's called person first language,
Mm-hmm.
whether you say person with an exceptionality or uh, exceptionality first, whether that status is the key part of your identity or not. I've heard arguments on both sides. But for me, it's always been something important. I'm certainly not hiding it, but not defining. There's a joke about that. A typical person asks his friend who uses a wheelchair, do you want to be called disabled, a person with a disability, varying exceptionality, special needs, handicapped? And the gentleman says, please call me Frank.
I like that.
I would rather be called a person with a disability than disabled, as people may think I am disabled in every way possible. I would prefer I would prefer to be known as someone with special needs or varying exceptionalities. I have had times where I wasn't recognized for my strengths, so I think care needs to be given to avoid labeling people.
Spot on. Spot on.
Thank you.
Throughout recorded history, and probably previous to that, people with varying exceptionalities have been oppressed. There's no other way to put it. Some of the most revered philosophers, like Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, advocated for children being born with an exceptionality to be taken to a pit right outside of the town where the townspeople would come and stone the infant to death.
I must admit, that thought is terrifying. Had I been born in another time or place, I wouldn't have been allowed to survive. Look at our Spartan podcast. We look at the positives of that society, but they had a eugenic style program. No one who was anything less than perfect was allowed to survive. But a great many acts of cruelty committed against those labeled different come out of a mixture of fear and contempt. Probably the worst example of that is the Nazis, who adopt a program of mass murder against anyone with differences, whether ethnic or physical. I'm ashamed to say that a lot of the programs just short of murder were created in the United States, involuntary commitments to institutions where people were warehoused, forcible sterilization that happened to a friend of mine as late as the early 1970s, and just general isolation and segregation for people with many kinds of issues.
Yeah, Nazi killing people is different, but I do see the connection. Hitler did the murdering based on the idea of cleansing the Aryan race. And because he thought that the disabled could not reasonably contribute to the state in any substantive, i.e., financial or technical way. And therefore, they were just a drain on his master race. You mentioned warehousing. What I meant by that term is putting people with varying exceptionalities into long term, often lifelong institutions, keeping them separated from, quote, normal people and also keeping them out of sight and therefore out of mind.
I feel horrified at the thought of being killed based on a disability. After all, who gets to decide why one person would have more value than another? We all have strengths and challenges as human beings. When it comes to school, I can't imagine being isolated in a classroom setting all day, as I have never been that way. I didn't realize how much fun it was to sit with peers at lunch until I got the tools to ask people if I could sit with them. It seems wrong to separate people based on their needs.
Amen to that.
That's very true, Patrick. Some experts have a very dangerous idea that separation for its own sake is good.
Yeah, there have been two kinds of damage that isolating and separating those with varying exceptionalities from the mainstream brings about. One is the feeling of being shunned and denigrated by people, being cut from the herd kind of experience. The other is the very real but hidden damage this does to society. By this, I mean people with exceptionalities bring a different insight into many issues. And I think this provides a necessary balance in understanding a lot of different cases.
I remembered for a long period during my education, I was denied access to mainstream education, as it was called, for many years. I wasn't fully mainstream until I was in high school. And the argument was remaining with my quote peers would improve my social skills.
I can't imagine you having bad social skills in the sense of assaultive, disruptive, or inappropriate behaviors. You've told me about some of the experiences you had, Dr. Deneen, with people taking off their clothes, urinating, masturbating, trying to throw desks out the window, all that kind of mess. I can't imagine that was anything even close to what you were doing.
I got mainstreamed through my wonderful parents advocating for it to happen. Most of the teachers I have had even agreed with my parents that I should be mainstreamed. My social skills would not be very good at all if I weren't with my typical peers. Being mainstreamed also helped me be up to date on grade level work.
I'm very pleased to see that. No, Bill, while I wasn't engaged in any of that behavior, I did spend a lot of my time with older people.
Mm-hmm.
So someone would ask me how I was, and I'd quote Orwell or something. And that type of response was sometimes seen as inappropriate. Now, I want to make it clear I don't have any delusions of superiority. If these peers were other people with exceptionalities who may have needed some assistance, that would be one thing. But as we said, some of the young people in the classes I was in engaged in all this violence and bizarre behavior. So in some ways, because knew I would at least behave myself, I was left to my own devices, which had both benefits and difficulties. On the one hand, I observed adults. I was educating myself. I was reading 2.5 years old, but I never learned and was never encouraged to learn spelling and grammar rules. I made the big mistake of scorning the protocols of academic society, believing that my charm, abilities at research, and discussion skills, what I called yak yak, would allow me to disregard, quote, details that I dismissed as unimportant. Since that time, I've had to acquire some of those skills through very diligent effort. It's a lifelong process, thus allowing my writing to be judged on merit and not dismissing it based on convention and form. Unfortunately, there's also this prejudicial perception of me being less because I do use a wheelchair. I want to make it clear I'm not playing the pity card. I am simply presenting the reality that I've had to deal with on many occasions.
You know, another interesting issue arises from the fact that the cause of varying exceptionalities remains largely unknown until the modern era. When the cause of something was unknown, it was often attributed to God or demons. Varying exceptionalities were frequently attributed either to a punishment from God or the work of or possession by demonic spirits. More than a few people continue to adhere to these beliefs today. And, for example, exorcisms continue to be performed. This kind of damning contributes to some people being frightened of people with varying exceptionalities because they're afraid of being around somebody supposedly cursed people. A similar phenomenon comes from a misapplication and misunderstanding of disease. I remember in the 1950s hearing that it wasn't safe to be around people with varying exceptionalities because you might catch the disease. Thankfully, my father, who was a physician, carefully and I might say very forcefully told me that was ridiculous. That particular fallacy has lost popularity, but still, mainstream people tend to stay away from people with varying exceptionalities. I believe there are several probable reasons. Some may just be uncomfortable because they have difficulty interacting with people with certain exceptionalities and are even more uncomfortable talking about their discomfort and seeking better interactions. Others may have a sort of a survival type guilt, like, there but for the grace of God go I. You've heard that statement, right?
Indeed.
I feel it is still unknown what causes varying exceptionalities. People don't trust those with varying exceptionalities at times. There are people uncomfortable around people with varying exceptionalities and don't want anything to do with them. I have experienced this when I transitioned from third grade to fourth grade. The principal did nothing to try to connect with me, but pretended to. She was the type of person to put the kids with varying exceptionalities all in one class in a corner classroom.
I know that I've dealt with a kind of survivor guilt. I've been blessed with much support from my friends, colleagues, and my family. It sometimes seems to me that I haven't accomplished what I ought to in what will soon be 50 years on this earth. My doctorate, for example, took almost 13 years to complete, which is much longer than the standard amount of time. This happened partially because of my own difficulty in securing funds for dissertation research and the unrealistic ideas of some that disability organizations would give me a blank check to complete my research. This is a comfortable fiction many mainstream people have. The myth is that the state gives you a blank check and unlimited assistance. The help available, when one can get it, is less than most people believe, and there is often a price. The price is the surrender, complete surrender of autonomy and succumbing to the thoughts and methods of managers who incidentally know little or nothing about research, much less historical research, often do not think higher education is valuable. Many of my compatriots have dealt with more severe difficulties with less assistance and have achieved remarkable success. I have friends that are wheelchair users that are lawyers and podiatrists and many other things. Because my needs are less physical and less visible, it may appear to some that I don't need any help at all. My needs are different. I'm glad to do what I can for myself, but they are no less real. Every person is different, and everyone had different assets and difficulties, meaning that their needs will be different.
It took a lot of guts for me to get the help I needed, even though I still had lots of anxiety. I had wanted the help I got from a wonderful therapist named Alex Gitter.
Both of you gentlemen make some really, really important points. It's easy for some people to say, okay, he doesn't need much help. He's in a wheelchair. We'll just wheel him where he wants to be. Or in your case, Patrick, as you say, it takes guts, real fortitude to get the help that you needed. And still you have anxiety about it, but you got the help you needed. Do you have any advice for others who may be in this situation, that some encouragement that you can give them that there is help?
I would tell them and maybe show them evidence that I got help, and that might prove to them that that help is available.
Yeah, it's interesting too, help in many different areas, because bearing exceptionalities includes such a wide spectrum. And often we have negative connotations to getting some kinds of help, like say, that's just a crazy person, or this is a person who's just trying to, bang the system. And we need to, as a group, as a society, we need to get over that and say, okay, there may be some people who are trying to get something that they don't need or whatever, but there's a heck of a lot more people who actually really do need the help and could benefit massively from it. It's the real and appropriate help that is needed is a broad range included in all these exceptionalities, and the subsequent types of assistance needed means that this community has no unified voice. The range of issues covers mental, physical, psychological, neurological health. Even within a specific diagnostic category, there are very wide ranges of issues. As Dr. Deneen pointed out, there are vast differences between people with cerebral palsy. The same is true for every category that we've mentioned.
I've seen people with ASD not being able to talk at all, and some are like traumatized by loud voices, and some people don't respond to like verbal cues right away with ASD. Some people may just have headphones on like all day, like just like doing their own thing and like need prompting to answer.
So what you're saying is that is a coping mechanism that many with ASD use. They put the headphones on and they sort of go into their own world. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, some people are just in their own world.
And then other people don't know how to do anything. What would be the best approach if you were to come upon somebody and they had their headphone on and they were just sort of grooving to that, whatever? What would be the best way to approach them, in your opinion? And I know you're not, you don't know everything about everybody, but what would be your take, Patrick?
Maybe the best way to approach them is maybe like tell them that there's something going on around them that they would like and that kind of stuff.
Hmm. But if they will they be startled by you approaching them and interrupting their little sojourn that they have their headphones on?
They could be, but you should probably like maybe apologize to maybe say sorry to interrupt you.
Good point. Yes, I think that's a great idea.
Something that's happened to me is people saying, I'd die if I had to deal with what you do. That's a very counterproductive attitude to have because it comes out of two not so positive things, fear and pity, which are two non productive things that just make the individual feel less than, ashamed of themselves, and frustrated. And I don't think it's meant out of a malicious intent because people see what we deal with. And my situation is very minor compared to some others. And they think, oh, I couldn't handle that. But being so blunt about it is something I don't like, to be totally honest. My situation has not been easy, but I've learned how to make the best of difficult situations. Patrick, I wonder if you've ever heard someone say they couldn't cope with your situation, and how does that make you feel?
I have not heard someone say they could not cope with my situation, but I have been prejudiced against before for my situation. I had a school principal in fourth grade that refused to give me an important accommodation, which was therapy dog visits in school 2 times a month for the first few months. My parents begged for it to happen, and it did happen because of my parents. I had lots of stress because of this.
Seems like a relatively simple accommodation.
It sure is. Just something that was being refused.
On specious grounds, I'm sure. Okay, there this is very interesting points. And they do point to some really important issues. I remember when I was a child having an accident that left me blind for several months, and how my siblings and others sometimes thought it was a good idea to guide and do things for me. I rejected that because it made me feel like a baby or incapable. Having a temporary exceptionality, it did make me more aware of feelings and issues that people in the exceptionalities community deal with frequently. I also know that many times people say and offer support, even when not asked for or required, out of a genuine desire to be of help. Sean, you mentioned a few occasions when people gave you unwanted help.
Yes, I think you're talking about this one nice person who saw me somewhere and wheeled me in a direction despite my instructions opposite to where I was going. They meant well, but assumed I didn't know where I was going and needed to figure that out. Other people who don't know me have asked, "Are you allowed to be out this time of night?" As though I'm either a child or on parole. That gets very annoying. Other times, people go in the other extreme. I'll ask for some minor assistance and people will get very irritated. I once asked someone when I had a bunch of packages to open a door and they hollered, "Can't you do that for yourself?" Many times people give unsolicited or unwanted guidance, direction, or advice, even though the outcome they have in mind may be contrary to my goals. This is unfortunate because it leaves me feeling incompetent, like a failure, overly stressed, a disappointment, or sometimes even feeling guilty. And then, of course, you have people who ask the most personal questions who don't know me. Can you put on your socks, take a shower, have sex, and on and on? Patrick, I wonder if you've experienced either side of this issue, and if you had the same reaction I had.
I have had an experience where I was told to just do my best. When I was in eighth grade during COVID lockdown, one of my paraprofessionals at school told me to just do my best when I needed help with something science related during virtual learning. I also had a science teacher that year that refused to recognize me for my strengths. I also am not a big fan of getting offered help with someone unless I ask for it, as I want to be as independent as possible and I really want to advocate for myself.
Good for you.
That's to your credit, Patrick.
Absolutely. Since we're talking about responses or actions of the mainstream and experts towards the exceptionality community, it's interesting to note that the concepts of how to help continue to go through cycles. For example, at one time it was thought that extracting all the teeth of persons with mental illness would remedy their issues. Lobotomies and other brain tissue ablation, which means cutting out or removing, or placating someone, just do your best by never saying no to them. Also, you know, that's just ridiculous. These faddish remedies are usually very detrimental and set people up for additional problems in the future and for dealing with the typical world. It's screwed up.
You are so right. Fads abound in dealing with exceptionalities, and keeping people calm at all costs will not prepare them for the typical world. It just doesn't work because life is full of disappointments. It's best to know how to cope with that rather than ignoring it, covering it up, or seeing that it doesn't happen. Physical problems are sometimes solved by what I call a surgery of the weak, whether it's stretching heel cords, breaking bones to cure movement difficulties, um, removing parts of the brain for epilepsy and other issues. Another fad, this is a personal favorite of mine, was equilibrium balls. People would rock on them for hours. It can be helpful, but it was seen as almost a cure all. and even the CIA was using it to help spies. The treatments are ineffective because at their best, they only deal with one aspect of a problem. You need a multivariate approach. As my mentor and father figure physical therapist, Dr. Andrew Kramer, said, you cure meat, you can't cure people. Patrick, I wonder if you've had any fad cures suggested to you.
I have had fad cures suggested to me that did not really help me. For example, there was a program I participated in called Brain Balance that really had no reliable science behind it. What made the program worse was the huge cost. I would eventually get the help I needed through more traditional therapies.
What is for our audience? What does the brain balance thing entail?
The brain balance thing, it claims that they help people with autism. They help people who struggle, and they believe that someone needs help and will struggle with that without them 100%. But that's not true. They do not. It's a fake program. It's a pseudoscience. It like they make you do like sensory issues, like sensory motor training and academic stuff, but it's not scientifically proven to help someone with autism.
So, in other words, they would have you do exercises like push-ups or sit-ups,
Yes,
or
that kind of stuff. That's what they do.
and this was supposed to, yeah, okay. God help us all. Uh, it may seem strange or non sequitur, but something I personally see as a problem for people in the special needs community is the overarching effects of capitalism. Don't get me wrong. I realize that capitalism was essential to the USA in the beginning. However, as things have progressed, there's been a more narrow focus on people being valued solely, or at least primarily, based on how much they can contribute to making money and boosting the wealth of corporations. It seems to me that this is contrary to the country's founding principles. Ideas and different perspectives are central to the American way of life, or at least it used to be. Today, it seems that a person's value is predicated on their wealth. We have entered into a period of what I call economic enslavement. And the people that suffer most egregiously are the most vulnerable, i.e., the special needs community. It is more difficult for some groups to get the education and community standing because they are seen as less than or do not have the necessary economic clout. We've seen the middle class shrink, the wealthy claiming more wealth, and the poor becoming poorer. A quick glance at statistics shows that the special needs community overall has less education, more people living in poverty, are the most underemployed, underinsured, and have the most struggles to maintain an appropriate standard of living.
I agree that capitalism is essential to the USA, but I do agree that there is more of a focus on people being valued based on how much money they make. I agree that the special needs community could suffer due to ableism. Special needs students are often less educated, but not everyone. I think the problem is that many look at people with varying exceptionalities as people who have deficits instead of tapping into their strengths.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
This is a very difficult problem to solve. It requires various solutions. Education needs to focus on practicality, earning a living, yes, but also on intellectual development. Too often, in the name of being practical, people with special needs are given limited educational objectives. This is circumscribing their possibilities. Because being self reliant and autonomous is seen as impossible, Work is seen as preventing despondency, something to do, rather than a necessity. It is assumed that family or the government will provide for every need, much less every want. As early as 1915, automobile pioneer Henry Ford fought against this and hired many people with movement, vision, and hearing difficulties to work in his plants. His idea was to find an individual's abilities and then create a job around that they were capable of doing. In this way, achievement replaced charity, and pride and productivity replaced pity.
A contributory problem is the poor educational system we have adopted. Teachers, they're not taught the best methods for teaching. And special needs people are often seen, as you point out, unable to learn. Unable to learn. Really? Give me a break. This twofold conundrum has created a situation wherein special needs people are relegated to a life of bare subsistence, forced to do things that don't boost self-esteem and puts them in a position contrary to our society's moral and economic foundations. The first step in teaching anyone anything is to understand where students are in the learning spectrum and find avenues for teaching specific to the student's needs. Teachers should follow the principle told to me by Jean Piaget when he told me that if you cannot explain a concept so that a 12-year-old can understand it, you don't know the concept well enough. Creativity, or the unleashing of potential, is the goal, along with providing information and data. The most illustrative example is Albert Einstein, considered by many to be one of the most intelligent men ever. The reality is that many others probably had equal or higher intellect, but did not have the creativity to apply that intellect. Einstein himself admitted to not being the best mathematician of his time, and that the inspiration for his theories of relativity came from a dream he had in which he was riding a beam of light through the universes. In my opinion, the elements that made him great, greater than many of his others with his intellect, were creativity, curiosity, and the ability to inspire others.
It seems you are rightfully very critical of some aspects of the educational system. In my own life, I've certainly been blessed with good teachers, but I learned as much or more from life exploration, conversations, reading, and travel. A true scholar is someone who pursues ideas like a person looking for a life partner. Patrick, as a current student, what do you think of these arguments?
I do think that some teachers are better than others. When teachers are not in the best position, students with special needs are less likely to learn. There are people with special needs that don't get help with their self-esteem. Teachers need to know what grade levels their students are in. Every teacher should have a goal to help maximize their students' potential. I mostly had good teachers. I also do agree with these arguments.
Yeah, we should explore why the special needs community has yet to make progress regarding being heard and getting more needs met. I think this starts with the fact that the special needs community is so diverse. And the needs are also so diverse that the neurotypical mainstream doesn't hear any specifics. In other words, the special needs community does not speak with one voice. Groups that have made significant progress on this front, such as African Americans, desegregation, and all of that, have been able to present a more united front to others. Another issue is that special needs people are less likely than others to apply political pressure to secure what they are entitled to as citizens.
Sometimes that's because needs are different. A blind person needs to be able to use Braille, for example. Some may need a guide dog. People with hearing loss or deafness need closed caption on their televisions and use sign language. Because of my cerebral palsy, I crawl around in my home. I need ramps for my wheelchair, assistance in opening doors, alternate means of note taking, and so on. Another reason, I have to be honest, this is unfortunate, but it's very true. Sometimes people are taught to just accept what they're given. Being assertive is dismissed as being entitled. Being annoyed is seen as tantrum throwing, or just you're having a bad day. It's not taken seriously. It is pounded into us over and over again. Don't make waves. Whether you're advocating for yourself or a loved one, that's a learned skill set. And often it's difficult because we don't have the skill set required to navigate the process. It's an important part of maturing, but it involves the development of several different skills. One of the things I admire about you, Patrick, and you, Dr. Weaver, is your willingness to, in a reasonable but determined way, to stand up for yourselves and assert what you believe to be right. You've been a great example to me. And Dr. Weaver, you greatly assisted me in so many aspects of my progress, whether figuring out where commas go or running away from snakes.
People will not understand those analogies, but I thank you very much.
I do agree that people with special needs don't always get their needs met, no matter what. There are neurotypical people that don't really understand special needs. Blind and deaf people also have needs. People do get taught to accept who they are, rather than having the guts to get help. Not everyone with special needs has what they need to develop some skills they need to succeed.
Often, the solutions imposed on the special needs community, for example, keeping someone calm at all costs or by over medicating them, although done with good intention, has disastrous results. There's a saying, the road to hell is paved by good intent. Every person has the right and responsibility to make the most of the talents they have been blessed with. Eleanor Roosevelt, who I actually met, said that no one can make you feel inferior without your consent, which is true, but difficult for a special needs person trained to accept whatever situations are imposed upon them.
I think Mrs. Roosevelt was quite right. It is a development of your thought process. There's also an African saying that seems to sum up what we're talking about. It goes, I'm going to be me as I am. You can beat or jail or even try to kill me. I am not going to be what you think I should be.
Medications can be very helpful, but prescribing too many meds can have damaging side effects. Neurotypical people sometimes prejudge those with special needs and don't let them make the most of their talents. Making the most of your talents can make you happy and lead you to develop new ones. I agree with Eleanor Roosevelt's statement. You don't have to be what others think you should be.
Another issue is the rampant underemployment in the special needs community. Capitalism today is not benevolent, by which I mean that if someone does not fit into the standard profile, they are not considered a viable, productive employee prospect and far less likely to get hired. Henry Ford saw this problem and found he could hire people from the special needs community, as Dr. Deneen mentioned, if he uncovered their abilities and made minor accommodations. This has the effect of making special needs people less powerful economically and politically when they don't have that.
I know that my desire to teach was seen in the phrase of the time, and excuse my sarcasm when I say this, as unrealistic. that's an all-purpose word of condemnation. But I dug in my heels, worked very hard, drove everyone else around me nuts, and made it happen. And this podcast, I think, has helped me with my teaching and other things because it's played a large role in demonstrating my ability to produce, not to just talk about doing something, but to get it done.
I am seeing things change a little bit. For example, the company that my father works for is very committed to tapping into the special needs community and recognizes that there are many people who can contribute greatly with the right support.
Very good. Listen, you guys have been wonderful, Patrick and Dr. Deneen, as always. Thank you, our listeners, for listening in today. We plan to have a panel discussion on these issues, and we have some truly interesting people joining us. So please tune in for that. We also will be publishing our new website very soon. And we're also going to, as I think I mentioned in the last podcast, we're going to start another channel on alternate history. We call it History Twists. Hey, listen, while you guys are thinking about it, give us a like, subscribe, and remember, we really appreciate your comments.
I also want to thank you for listening. It has been an honor to talk on another podcast. Thank you, Sean and Dr. Weaver.
Oh, thank you, Patrick. You have been wonderful, just absolutely wonderful, and your insights are very valuable.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, my friend. And thank to all of our listeners. We look forward. We've done some wonderful things, and there are a lot more coming. And you've helped us all to make it possible. And we really appreciate it. Take care, friends.